so much for joining our OMQ meeting. I was just thinking back to when we did our first OMQ Zoom room, which some of you may have joined, which would now be coming up to almost a year ago, which just seems crazy. I'm sure we're all feeling the same in that respect, that we're still here. Obviously, we've all learned a lot about what we're doing and how we're operating and so on, but it's just, it's quite overwhelming in some ways to still be in this position. So we thought it would be really great to have another get together, as it's always wonderful as well, just to bring the network together again. And it's great to be able to share ideas and hopefully help each other. And Matthew can give us a bit of an update on latest sort of regulations, but also I think it's really important to think about how we're handling this work from home and sort of isolation elements and employee engagement and well-being, as well as safety, now that we are so far into this situation that we're in. And yeah, just see sort of what can be done now. I mean, I think I certainly have felt at quite a loss as to, what do we do now? Do we keep doing the things we're doing, or could there well be other things that we could start and reinstate? So Matthew will talk about some specific topics and areas around employee safety and well-being, and we'll also try and keep 15 minutes at the end to do a bit of a Q&A. Please do feel free though to ask any questions that you may like to ask throughout, as we'd like it to be more of a discussion rather than just purely speaking and 15 minutes at the end. So do engage in the chat if you'd like. And also afterwards, I'll circulate to you Matthew's details, because you can also have a complimentary conversation with him further if there's something quite specific you'd like to discuss out of this arena. And we shall hopefully finish around 12, so lots to pack in. And I'll pass over to you, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Susanna, and good morning, everybody. Yes, we are still on morning. Good morning, everyone. So, wow, what a difference a year makes, I suppose. We've seen so many changes and differences since this came into effect last year. In fact, many of the things that they were recommending at the beginning, when you remember, it was a case of only wear masks if you're going to be around somebody who's got COVID, to the changes they made in legislation in July that's now made it's law to wear a mask in certain areas now and out in public, to the risk assessments, to the mental health of employees, because we've never had a pandemic like this before. So I think initially when we first had the lockdown, a lot of people expected it to be over within 2 or 3 months. Sadly, a year down the line, we are still in lockdown. We're going to be in lockdown until at least March, possibly to the end of April. They keep extending furlough, and these are the things to really look out for any business owner, for any company. When furlough extends from April, and I believe May now as well, I'll double check that. When they keep extending furlough, it's because they honestly believe it's going to need to be put in place for that amount of time. So lockdown, the national one, may very well end once we hit Easter, but you can always guarantee we're going to have a series of tier 3 and tier 4 lockdowns. And one of the biggest changes since we last spoke last year has now been the legislation that's been put in place specifically for COVID, but also last April, the Good Work Plan came into effect. So it's almost 12 months old now. But what we are seeing as a direct result of the Good Work Plan, we're seeing many businesses sadly come a cropper with just simple things like furlough payments. So this isn't even motivating staff, managing productivity and efficiency, just on a very basic record keeping level. Some of these new pieces of legislation that came into effect are not being met, and it's leaving a lot of businesses exposed. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, it's really going to cover 2 key areas. I'm going to talk about the legislation that every single business in the country technically, and I appreciate we're in the real world with a pandemic, but that every business in the country should now be adhering to. And this was the Good Work Plan last April, but also quite a lot of changes that came in for COVID on May the 11th. And this is all going to be based predominantly around 2 things: how you communicate with your staff and how you keep records. Now, it encompasses a lot of areas. You've got the legislation, so these are the things you've got to do legally, but then there's also the very practical things. Staff working from home for a few weeks is one thing. We've now been in this for a year. It is possible, and in fact very plausible, that we're going to be in this for another year. This seems to be the way the tables are turning. So managing staff from a very short-term perspective to this now long-term, almost new normal that we're in now of people working from home is very, very tricky. You can almost guarantee that productivity has dropped across the board for almost every single business in the last 12 months. And for many of the businesses that I'm working with, it's almost a graph now that you can chart, and productivity is going further and further because the more people get used to working from home, and I'm not saying everybody does this, but sadly, you know, people do lose interest. People do lose concentration. And if you don't have an effective way of communicating with your employees, if you don't have an effective way of engaging employees, what you are going to find, and this is very common now, now we're sort of 12 months down the line, is you're going to find pockets of staff who are isolated. And once you start losing them, I suppose from a motivational perspective, once people start getting distant, once people stop doing exercises, once people stop joining in with group activities, you've got a slightly larger potential problem than productivity. You could have a health issue, you could have mental health bubbling under the surface there. And because of the good work plan and because of the new laws that have come into effect this year, any mental health issue for an employee during working hours is now the very strong responsibility of the employer. And it is now a legal requirement under that good work plan that you have a mental health policy of some kind that effectively states how you're going to measure the mentality and the mental health of your employees. So it's no longer a case of, you know, we'll point them in the right direction, or we've got, you know, mental health first aiders. You actually need to have something in place to measure their mental health. And a lot of that is going to be on the basis of questionnaires. So this all begins with one document, and this is what became law on May the 11th, your COVID-19 risk assessment, which sounds very health and safety orientated, and there is a massive element of health and safety to it. But actually, a lot of your employment law, a lot of the productivity, a lot of how you're actually going to manage your staff from home will also come under this risk assessment. And I've talked a lot about risk assessments, so what I'm not going to do is go over everything that will be in that. I think we're now at a point where if anybody on here has not done that COVID-19 risk assessment, and for anyone who's wondering, it should be around 10 to 15 pages long. If you haven't got that, everything else I'm about to say, it's unlikely that you've got that as well. So everybody here is entitled, and this is something that I can give. So if you call Peninsula directly, it's going to be a bit tricky. If you call me, I'll be able to give you a confidential review today, this week, whenever it's suitable for you, just to talk about specifically what needs to go in your COVID-19 risk assessment and how you record those findings. And the reason why this is so critical for every business is when you've got people working from home, they need health and safety training as though they're in an office. All the legal responsibilities you have in an office, you still have for people working from home. It's an absolute minefield, and it's 10 times harder for one reason. You can't see these people anymore. It used to be a case of, you know, if someone was stood on a chair changing a light bulb, you could see that across the office and say, what's going on? Now we can't. Most accidents happen in the home. If an accident does happen during working hours, it's now going to be your responsibility based on this legislation from May. So making sure that those risk assessments are done correctly for your staff is critical. But then also how you communicate your findings. It's really important, if it's not happened already, that all of your employees have got training on how to actually work and operate safely from home. They need training now in quite a few different areas. At first, when we were in around April, May time, it was just a case of teaching people how to sit correctly. So things like we're getting a lot of claims now for lower back pain, we're getting a lot of claims for shoulder pain within the UK, because people sadly weren't shown how to sit correctly and how to sit in a chair. And that was just one of the fundamental basics that came in. We've now got a whole host of responsibilities, with mental health being the largest, but also ensuring things like your employees are encouraged to exercise, your employees are encouraged to speak to other people within the team, they're encouraged to join in with group activities. And all of these different things, it's sadly because of the world we live in, records have to be kept for all of it. So if you're going to communicate something to your employees, it's really critical that you've got a way of recording that, whether it be you're sending them out by email, some sort of a memo system, you have an app that speaks to all of your staff. It doesn't matter how you record it, but it's really important these things are recorded, because what we're finding now, and what we are absolutely going to see an explosion of in the future, is going to be productivity issues. I think most job losses have happened now as far as the businesses that don't need to furlough people. If you're a company that's still got people furloughed, it's probably going to be a very tricky second half to the year. But for all those businesses that are not furloughing staff right now, and we know in the finance world there isn't really lots of that going on, your biggest issue is going to be, effectively, how do we keep our staff productive? How do we keep people on target? How do we make sure that people are still engaged in their work? And it's going to be very difficult for a lot of companies, and all of this is going to depend essentially on how you're communicating with those employees. And I know I sound like a broken record, but communication and record keeping is the absolute critical thing here. So whether or not someone's had a vaccine, whether someone who is on furlough, whether it's payroll, whether it's the working hours. This is a very common one. Last April, recording all working hours and breaks became a legal requirement. So again, if people are working from home, how are we making sure that they're taking their breaks? How are we making sure they're not working 13-hour days? All of these things need to be put in place and calculated. So it all comes down to your risk assessment. And like I say, I'm not going to go war and peace into everything that needs to go into the risk assessment. But essentially, if you've got staff working from home, the area that they're working in needs to be looked at. The training that they've had to make sure that they're safe, both mentally and physically, definitely needs to be looked at and recorded. If they need to leave their home for absolutely any reason whatsoever as part of their role, even if it's just something as simple as posting a letter, again, all of that needs to be recorded and risk assessed. And if anybody wants a confidential review, just to go over that for them, complimentary, then there's no issue there at all. Just before I talk about some of the communication and some of the statements that need to be made to staff now, does anybody have any general questions about that risk assessment?
Just in terms of checking in with mental health, does your system of sort of monitoring, for want of a better word, does that need to go into the risk assessment? So for example, we'll be sending out a questionnaire every week, or this survey will go out to all staff once a month. Like, does that level of detail need to be in the risk assessment?
It does now, and what a great question, because originally the risk assessments were just people were just looking at the physical health and safety of it, but because of the Mental Health Act, the mental health aspect needs to go in as well. So effectively, for want of a better phrase, making sure your employees don't get cabin fever or go stir crazy whilst at home is quite a big one. So the activities that your actual employees are engaging in together is quite important. So for example, over at Peninsula, we have like an aerobics class once a week. I laugh as I talk about it, because some of the outfits we see from some of the senior managers and things, it's funny and it's engaging, and everyone's exercising, and you're seeing people in a slightly different light. And I think if one thing has happened with this whole COVID is people have gone quite formal. People are no longer as relaxed as they used to be. People are on edge. We've got this pandemic everywhere. It's nice to have a little bit of levity, in those sorts of situations. But yeah, sadly, the detail has to be recorded greatly, just because if anybody does accuse you of not being sympathetic or empathetic to their mental health needs, because it's now that legal requirement under the Mental Health Act, you actually do need to be able to demonstrate what you have put in place, purely if there's an allegation of some kind.
Can I just ask a question on working hours? In my organisation, a lot of us already work longer hours than our contractual, than our contract states. It's just the nature of the beast when we're in the office, and I know we're still doing it at home. And we offer as much flexibility as we can. We offer downtime and all the rest of it. But how do you legislate for that? Because we're not the type of organisation that sticks to the legislation in terms of working hours anyway. So now that we're working from home, how different is that for us realistically?
Well, what it's going to boil down to is it's two things. Number one, have you had to furlough anybody during this period at all? No. Okay, so that's one thing.
No redundancies, no furlough. We speak to, we have teams, they speak to their individuals every week, every month. We have connectivity groups, we have yoga, we have everything that we think we're supposed to do. But I do know that some teams are working exceptionally long hours, and that is no different to when we're in the office. So what I want to try and understand is, what's our exposure there?
So as long as you've got, as long as people have opted out of the work time regulations agreement, so no more. So are they working more than 48 hours a week? Would you say?
I think some teams are, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So making sure that you've got that they have actually signed a declaration, so that then they do not come under those work time regulations. That's the first thing. But your biggest exposure is going to be people making a PPI style claim for overtime or holiday. So every hour you work, you have to be granted holiday. So although you don't have to pay people for that overtime, every extra hour they do outside of their contracted working hours needs to be recorded, and either time off in lieu or holiday be granted for that. So that's your biggest risk of exposure, someone making a statutory claim like that.
Okay. I wouldn't say that's widely known to an employee, would you?
There is a huge no-win, no-fee industry brewing from this. So it's very similar to PPI claims. When PPI claims first came about, nobody had any idea that you could make a claim from your bank on how they sold you your insurance. Now it's quite a booming industry. So it will just be a case of, were you working during furlough? Were you working during lockdown? Would you like us to check your contract for any changes in legislation? You could be entitled to compensation. Right. So again, I'm not suggesting it's going to happen anytime soon to your business or your industry, but your question was, what's our biggest risk of exposure? It's going to be some sort of a claim like that, I would suggest. And that's only going to come about if you have an issue with an employee. They don't usually start picking away at these things or seeking advice until perhaps you're trying to discipline somebody or get them onto some sort of an improvement plan. So no, I wouldn't suggest there's any inherent risk to you, but there is some slight exposure.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's my pleasure.
Matthew, can I just raise, a question that was in the chat?
Yeah.
If that's okay. How can a manager monitor employees working from home to ensure they are taking necessary breaks?
Okay, so the way we do it, and this is predominantly the way most companies have been forced since remote working became the normal, is to have some sort of a system, whether it be on the computer, whether it be on their phone. So we do it in the form of an app, and they just literally clock in and out when they start their working day and finish their working day. When somebody goes on a break, they press a break button. And it's that simple. Now, what is quite good actually is if you do have somebody at home not doing that simple task, so they're not logging in the mornings, they're not recording their breaks, it really helps you just engage where these people are mentally. Because if someone isn't doing that most basic task of just clicking to log in or pressing when they have a break, what are the chances that they're doing all the other work as part of their role? So as a management tool, it's pretty spot on, because you can use it to focus on people that perhaps need that little bit more attention. But it's also really, really easy in the event of a claim. If someone suggests that they've not been given the right breaks or that they've not been paid the right amount of holiday, you can just pull up, tap, tap, tap. You can pull up exactly, well, here's all the times they logged in. Here's all the times they've logged out. Here's the holiday that we've calculated for this person for the week. They've been given everything they're supposed to have been given.
Great.
But it is tricky.
Yeah, I can see that's quite hard. Also, another quick question, accidents in the home. If an employee goes into their kitchen to make coffee and they slip or trip, isn't that the responsibility of the employee, not the company? How would it be the company's responsibility? So,
great question. During working hours, the health and safety of your employees is your responsibility. Wherever they are working from, so their site, if you like, so in this case, their home, the home has now become the workplace, because you've said to them, we need you to work from home. So as soon as the home becomes the workplace, all your health and safety responsibilities apply. So if we know that person is going to go and make a cup of coffee or make a sandwich, they need to have the same training they'd be given for a kitchen in an office, because believe it or not, if someone does accidentally burn themselves making coffee or slip in their own kitchen, they do, if it's happened during working hours, during a break or not, then yeah, they do technically have a claim. So it's just giving them the same training you'd give them in an office kitchen.
I mean, certainly I know for us personally, I don't think we've ever trained anyone to make a cup of tea or, you know, so, okay. I mean, that sounds a bit flippant possibly, but
so slips and trips
how does that, yeah.
It would normally come under your slips and trips training. So being careful around liquids and fluids, because it's either going to be water or tea and coffee. So you'd normally cover that with your slips and trips.
Okay.
For the office.
Can I just ask a question? Because I think I think I might have missed something. Because I was speaking to our facilities manager last week, and we were of the understanding that because people are temporarily working from home, we haven't asked them to work from home permanently, that they are not required to have a full assessment for their workplace. If they're asked to legally and contractually change their place of work and be deemed a home worker permanently, then yes, you do have to do that. But because we're in this temporary state, we're not required to do that. So have we missed something there?
Yes, it's the definition of temporary and permanent. So temporary is up to 12 weeks. So if it's anticipated that someone will be working from home for 12 weeks or more, it's classed as permanent.
Okay, but even if, because it's a lockdown situation and then we come out of lockdown and then we go back into a lockdown, and we've allowed our individuals to voluntarily come into the office or work from home, does that have any bearing on it?
It may do, and it's something I can talk to you about later perhaps, but essentially the advice from the government is that if they were working, I know it's not law, but this is what they want, if they were working from home in the first lockdown, they should be working from home in this lockdown. How do I put this? Voluntary, asking someone if they want to come in, if they do volunteer and come in, and then there's an incident, can cause issues. So the best advice is that everybody works from home until the government says office workers are allowed to go back in. And I can go into a lot more detail on that for you. It's just I need a bit more information first.
Yeah, so actually, so it's the 12-week rule that changes it from temporary to having to have the assessment. So we've probably missed that bit. But in terms of working from home in the first lockdown and what we're doing now, we've followed the guidelines, but we've taken a slightly different angle, that we deem some people for their mental health to go into the office and work. And so we are allowing them to do that. And we see that as part of the remit. Yeah.
That would be a valid reason, yeah. If you've got that in the risk assessment and you're following all those other rules, so they're working from 2 meters, they've got a mask, all those kinds of things. That's an acceptable reason if it's for mental health.
Okay, good. Right, thank you.
No, my pleasure, my pleasure. And actually, what we were just talking about there links into where I was going to go with this next, because ultimately, this all boils down to your policies and how you're going to react to certain situations. One thing that did come into effect with the Good Work Plan is any situation that you can envisage yourself in with a business, any conversation you can see yourself having with an employee now has to have some kind of policy for it. So with this, for example, if we're looking at furlough, if we've got, how do I put this? Let's say you've got employees, let's say you have a sudden shortage of work, and I know it's unusual for your industry, but let's say you were to lose quite a large client as a business, and you suddenly had to maybe lose some employees just for a short amount of time. Being able to reduce people's working hours in an emergency, being able to temporarily lay people off in an emergency now has to have some sort of policy written for it. You need to have a policy in place for how you're going to manage productivity, because if anybody does slip and they're not meeting their targets, unless it states very heavily, if you do not meet your targets, you may receive a disciplinary. It's going to be very, very tricky to enforce action further and further down the line. The policies really revolve around everything. And believe it or not, you've now got to have a policy. You've got to have in the contract every benefit, for example, that the business gives. Well, that will have been evolving quite a lot with COVID. So things like I mentioned, we have aerobics classes. There might be other things that you put on. All of these different things now, all these different activities, all of these different benefits, any new policies within the business, such as telling people to work from home, asking people to come into the office, all has to have some sort of a policy written. The mental health and physical health is going to revolve around all of this. If people are happy mentally, they're getting enough sleep, if people are getting up early enough and they're going to bed early enough, you're going to have almost zero problems with productivity and efficiency. That is then followed up and backed with communication. So I would strongly advise, unless it's not practical, and sometimes it's not, having at least a conversation each week with every single employee. So if you've got team leaders or team managers, however the structure works in each of your individual businesses, having a catch up with those employees, and not so much doing it as though we're like a performance review, just a general, how are things, what can we do to help you, how are you feeling? And we find that by having those conversations up front before there's an issue, massively reduces the chances of there becoming an issue in the future, especially again coming back to the isolation element of this. Human beings need to have human interaction, and if we can't do it face to face, if it can't be done physically, then trying to find a digital way of doing that, or even just talking on the phone, is going to be massively beneficial than doing nothing. Now, that's going to look different for every business. Some companies are going to have to do this in a very different way, which is why, and again, I can talk about it in your confidential review, the sorts of policies you would have in place, although you're all in very similar industries, some of those policies could be very different dependent on the structure of the company. The records that you have to keep, it's no longer just in case you get a tribunal. You know, if we were speaking just over a year ago, I'd be telling you to basically keep all of these records just in case somebody decides to say, you've not treated me very fairly, I'm not happy with either the training I've had or the way I've been disciplined or the way I've been spoken to, we're going to a tribunal. And although we are seeing a lot of tribunals for people who feel that they've not been treated very safely at work, actually, the bigger exposure is going to be HMRC or the Health and Safety Executive. The Health and Safety Executive have been granted special powers to essentially do to be able to drop in and do a spot check on any company. Now, they are going to be focusing on the industries that are still open, like construction and things like that. But all it will take is one complaint from one employee to the Health and Safety Executive to say someone's having a mental health issue, or we don't feel very safe, whatever it may be, and your business will get some sort of an inspection. So having those health and safety records in place are really important. And as I've said, the main things are training your staff from home. So we were talking earlier about making drinks. It's imperative that they're given slips and trips training, and they're told how to hold a cup properly. I know it sounds ridiculous, but they're told how to hold a cup properly when walking, to make sure that you're not carrying paper and things like that, and you've got a drink on top. There's so many different things. But slips and trips training, manual handling, working from heights if they've got stairs. And again, it sounds ridiculous, but if they have stairs in the building, they need working from heights training, and mental health. Those are going to be the core things. Now, the Health and Safety Executive will want to see those. And if anyone does make a claim, that's going to get you out of jail every single time. But then the next thing, and this is the one that's most likely for everybody we're speaking to today, is HMRC. They've been granted special powers now. Well, not even special powers. This is just a new law now. If they believe an employee has not been getting the right amount of breaks, they're going to fine them. And one thing they're now able to ask you for, when you submit what you're paying your staff, if they want to, and they have announced that they'll be doing this from January. It was going to be this January, but because of COVID, they've postponed it. But they are going to be asking for the working hours just randomly from different businesses, just as an audit. And this is something new that every single business is being looked at. So I'm not saying every person in this webinar is going to be asked in January for their staff's working hours and breaks, but some of you are. Some of you next January are going to be asked for that. And they'll say, well, it should have been in from the January before. So that's 2 years. Everyone should have been prepared for it. If no one's had to furlough, it's not too much of a problem. But for any businesses that may need to take advantage of furlough in the future, especially if you're looking to make staff redundant, if that's something that's going to happen, again, those working hours and those records are absolutely imperative. The exposure doesn't come from somebody saying, I've been overworked massively, I want to make a claim for mental health. Those are not the most common claims. The most common claims are these PPI style claims, where someone says, I can't remember if I've been given all the right breaks and holidays. Could you just send me a record of all my working hours? If you ever get a request like that, someone asking for their working hours, a claim is absolutely imminent, because what they're hoping and praying for, not your employee, by the way, the no win, no fee lawyer, is that you say we don't have those records, because that in itself is an offence, and they can claim up to 2 months' salary. So if you've got a whole company, if you've got, I don't know, 50 staff, suddenly having to pay 100 months worth of salary, which is the equivalent of 2 years, just because their records were not being kept from a statutory reason, it can be quite costly. If you've only got 5 or 6 staff, it's not going to be a huge fine, but the more staff you've got, it comes under all of them. So again, I'm not suggesting this will definitely happen to you, but if we've got 40 people in this room, I would cautiously suggest 4 of you at some point in the next 12 months are going to have some sort of an issue with an employee, either asking for this information or trying to go to a tribunal. It's the odds are around 1 in 10 we're seeing this at the moment. I actually think that's going to increase massively the more people become aware of it, like PPI claims, but at the moment, staff are not as aware. I think the real issues are going to be what we do when furlough ends, if you do have to suddenly restructure within the business. Some people are going to be resistant to it, especially if you start need to give people new job titles, especially if people need to take on more responsibilities. And again, it's difficult to generalize this, because every single company I'm talking to today will have very different business plans and very different, I suppose, targets for the future. But ultimately, you do need to have some sort of a plan B, where if you were to lose your largest client, for example, or if there was to be a significant reduction in business for whatever reason, what policies do you have in place that would allow you to immediately restructure the business? And these, again, are the sorts of things to be thinking about for the future as opposed to now. Your biggest issue now is if you've not got your COVID risk assessment and findings done. If that's all in place, the next thing that you need to get on top of is the good work plan. This came into effect in April, so it's important that all your documents and policies reflect that. If you've got both of those things completed, then actually, as a business, you're in quite a strong position right now. And the only thing you have to really do is measure and monitor it. If you don't have something in place to tell you when the law changes, especially when it comes to COVID and lockdown and who can be in an office and who can't, well, number one, that's technically a breach, because you're supposed to have access to competent advice. But secondly, you may accidentally miss something that could be incredibly beneficial or at the same time very negative for the business. We don't want to keep staff at home any longer than we have to, but what we don't want to do is send somebody back into the office if perhaps there was a new law last week that suggests, or a new act, I should say, that suggests that you can't. So again, every business in here is going to have very different records from very different findings, from very different risk assessments, but the core things are going to be the same. How you record it and how you communicate to your staff is effectively what's going to be scrutinized. I mean, for example, if I was to, and this is rhetorical, but if I was to say to everybody in the room, how many of your employees know the business's mental health policy? If someone is feeling low, like really, really low, that they feel like they want to give up on everything, who do they contact in your business, or what things are open to them to support them? If someone is having childcare issues, and again, this is a really important one from productivity, and probably I've saved this till the end because this is the one that I know from all the financial businesses that I work with, from all the office-based companies with staff at home, this is without a fact the biggest impact, and it's the childcare issue. If a child's school has closed, you've now got an employee, and they all have effectively, you've got an employee who's half teaching their child, half looking after and feeding their child, and half doing work for you. And this is the core reason why productivity have dropped. Yes, some people have got a little bit lax and, you know, they're not as engaged. But if you're a parent and you've got, I mean, right now I've got two children at home. It's very, very difficult. And you need to be able to manage that with sensitivity, but at the same time, still be able to, you know, if it's not productive for the business and if it's affecting at the end of the day, the bottom line, and it's affecting the figures, you may need to take some sort of an action. It's knowing how to do that and when to be able to do that. And again, it's very tricky because nobody wants to make redundancies. Nobody wants to give disciplinaries or let somebody go because they've had to look after their child during a pandemic. But very, very sadly, for some of the people I'm speaking to today, these are decisions over the next 12 months that some of your companies are going to have to make because you've simply exhausted every other avenue. And that's going to be very, very complex. And I would suggest to anybody right now, if you have got employees struggling with childcare to work, definitely have that confidential review with me, because I can give you some really, really strong ways of re-engaging that employee without alienating them. If you know in your heart of hearts that you've only got a 1 or 2 page risk assessment for COVID, have that confidential review with me, because I can absolutely tell you what needs to go in there. But the biggest one for everybody watching today is, again, if you know in your heart of hearts that your staff have not been trained, and that training has been recorded on their mental health, on things like slips and trips at home, on how to sit at their office at home. And when I say recorded, I mean, if a judge says to you, I need to know what that person was told and shown, are you in a position to go, here you go? Those are the sorts of things now we're 12 months into this, that we see actually win or lose cases. My biggest prediction last year was that we were going to see a spate of claims of people sort of having accidents in their own house. It hasn't quite happened that way, but what we are seeing is lots and lots and lots of back injury claims. It's like the 90s again. It went into mental health for quite a while. Over the last 5 to 8 years, back pain has replaced mental health as sort of the new invisible illness. We are back at back pain now. And for one reason, I believe, I think it's genuinely happening. We have got an absolute spate of physiotherapists. We use occupational physiotherapists. They're all booked up right now because so many people are working from home in the wrong conditions. And it doesn't matter, you know, how well you can do it. I suffered from back pain last year because I wasn't sitting correctly in my chairs, and sort of what I had to do the training again just to remind myself how to do it. But that is causing problems. If you've got an employee, and again, just from a practical level, if all of a sudden that employee can't stand up properly, or if they're having to go and see a physio, it's, again, you've got massive productivity problems. You've got a potential claim down the line if you've not shown them how to sit in a chair. So if anyone is complaining of back pain or back twinges, that should be the biggest red signal that you see, the biggest red alarm. And again, if that's something you're concerned about, or you just want a little bit of advice, have that confidential review with me. It's completely complimentary. It will last however long it needs to. So for some of them, they're about 10 to 15 minutes long. For other people, it can be a good hour to an hour and a half at their request, because they're asking so many questions and wanting so much information. So I'll give you as much time as you need. But again, it sort of brought us up to that last 15 minutes now before 12 o'clock. Does anybody have any immediate general, or if you want to share any specific questions about anything I've spoken about now, or perhaps anything that you've heard maybe coming over the horizon in the future, anything you'd like to scratch the surface of?
There were some other questions in the chat, Matthew, just to go back to that.
Yeah, sure.
Specifically around mental health and whether staff are likely to disclose issues in general catch-ups. Have you seen over the last sort of 6 to 9 months any good practical ways of checking in with mental health, whether it be surveys? I saw last week there was a company that got quite a lot of press with this bracelet idea of people saying, you know, yes, I feel good today, no, I don't. Like, have you seen any good practical ways of monitoring it?
The easiest one is encouraging good behaviors. Exercise is a huge one, absolutely huge for mental health, and encouraging exercise is very strong. We have weekly check-ins, so we have managers checking in with the individual team leaders. We always get a weekly message from our CEO, just reminding us to take one step at a time, just reminding us that we're all in this together and this is a global issue, just reminding us that if we're feeling low, that we're not the only ones in this position, and we've got that occupational health care on hand 24/7 to help us through it. That's how we are encouraging this, because again, it's all about how you record it. If somebody has got chronic depression, they may not even be aware of that. So it's good to allow people to sort of self-diagnose whether or not they're in a good or bad state. But some people will be in absolute denial about it, and they won't even appreciate that they could have depression or some other mental health issue. So just pushing people towards eating well, having good exercise, and if they're feeling low, even if they're just having a bit of a rubbish day, ringing those counsellors. Our occupational healthcare, it's not for people when they're sort of on death's door. It's not for people when they're at their last resort. It's for people who want to talk to somebody. And in this climate, especially if people are missing loved ones, if people are missing friends, just being able to pick up the phone, speak to someone with a really nice voice and say, do you know what, I've had a real rubbish day today and I'm missing my mum and I wish I could give my gran a hug. These people are excellent. They're like friends on the end of the phone. They're all trained counsellors, but they all appreciate what people are going through. So for some people who perhaps don't have the strongest social circle and the strongest social networks, being able to provide some sort of a service like that they know is confidential. So if they do ring up and say, I think me and my wife are going to split up, for example, that's not something people want to share at work, but they'll happily share with a stranger, especially if this person's going to give them some help and advice. So just encouraging people and reminding them of what is available to them is your best strategy. Bar forcing people, that's about the best way to do it, but it's on a repeat cycle. So every week, constantly be reminding, this is what you've got, this is what you can do, we're all in this together.
Yeah, I think that's a key one, because I think most companies have that service available, but I don't think many of them have been constantly pushing that message out that this service is available to you, or, you know, yeah. I accessed this service last week and actually found it really useful. Like, please make sure you're using it. It's there for you. I think that message isn't being reiterated.
No, and I think a lot of that is because, you know, managers and company owners think, well, we've announced it. Everybody knows we've got it, kind of thing. But people do forget. People forget the very basics sometimes, and it's just that gentle reminder. Some people who have lost the phone number, perhaps, and things like that. So now we're finding once a week is it's a really nice way of doing it. And Tuesdays, funnily enough, seem to be the best day to do that. If we promote it on a Tuesday, we see the calls go up. We don't know who's using it, but we know people are. So yeah, once a week, checking in, letting people know that they can speak to their managers. That's as good as it's going to get. But try and have that human element rather than just everything be email. That once a week phone call, just 5 or 10 minutes. How are you doing? How's it all going? Anything I can do for you? It works wonders for your employees. They actually feel like they're being cared for, you know, which is important.
That's really great. There's another great message in the chat. We host online yoga Pilates twice a week, which sounds fantastic.
Yeah, that does sound
good. It sounds really good. But we find it's only the same few employees who participate in these. We also send out daily, weekly communications with emphasis on mental health and what the company is providing for them, blogs and so on. So how can we know or find out if they're available? If they avail of these, if they are feeling low or depressed?
You can't really, and there is with all of these things, there's always going to be a line. Now you're putting on yoga and Pilates, and it sounds like you're promoting that. If you're promoting robust mental health and how to maintain mental health, again, that's quite a large amount of things that you're doing. So I would cautiously suggest that apart from perhaps, and this is because you've asked the question, is there anything else we could do? Perhaps asking some of those people not doing the yoga and Pilates what sort of group activities they may want to see, just as a final attempt at engaging those people. I would cautiously suggest you're almost doing all you can from that respect. Having something to call. Yeah, that's very good.
That does sound really good. And it's sometimes a bit hard to know, you know, how much do you need to do? You know, is a weekly exercise class, for example, and weekly check-ins and maybe some information weekly or monthly, is that enough? You know, how far do you have to go? Do you have to, and I know it's a bit how long is a piece of string, but it's also knowing, would that be viewed as sufficient? And it's not, I guess it's not just about it being sufficient, it's about, we all want to make sure our employees are genuinely okay as well. Not just about making sure we don't fall foul of the laws. It's we care about them and we want everyone to be okay.
Of course.
So yeah, it's kind of how much.
Once a week generally, that's the right balance, because if it's overkill and you're doing a different activity every night, people can feel sort of quite trapped, and they almost feel obligated to do all of these different activities. So I would say that sort of engagement once a week, but from 2 or 3 people. So like I say, I have one from my manager, his manager will typically speak to us, and then we have a huge one from our CEO once a week. If people are seeing from different angles of the business, we care. Just those gentle reminders of what's open to them during these hard times, all of those different things. If you're having struggle with childcare, whatever it may be, speak to your manager. It's just those constant gentle reminders, and once a week is the perfect balance we find for that.
That's good.
No one's going to get frustrated. No employee will ever get sick and tired of hearing their bosses say, let us know if there's anything we can do for you. Let us know if we can make life easier, or if you want to speak to us.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that you know, your employee may, or we all may have, you know, 8-9 hour working day or whatever it is contracted, but if someone is working, you know, 4 hours really productively, and the other 4 is having to homeschool, or is, you know, I don't know, needing to take an hour or 2 out for a good walk just to feel okay. I mean, that's got to be the sort of best situation we can be in, than expecting everyone to be, which I'm sure most companies aren't, but maybe some are, you know, literally at their desk constantly, and therefore struggling. You know, we want to kind of make the best of the hours in which we can operate well.
You do, and people have got very long memories, and you know, I think this is a nice one actually to sort of close with, if you like. At some point we are going to be out of this, and I predict heavily it's going to be probably the first quarter, maybe the second quarter of 22. We've pretty much been told there's going to be another lockdown in the winter. We don't know how many people are going to be vaccinated. You know, there's all sorts of talk about shortages now. So we probably have got at least another year of this. You know, this is the thing. And it is just so important that your staff feel looked after, because when this is over, if people do feel they've not been treated very nicely, if people do feel as though they weren't looked after and their interests weren't at heart, there's going to be a lot of businesses that pop up out of the chaos, the recession. It's how all recessions go. We get more startups than we've ever seen before. They will have a look around. You will lose some of your very best people who you may have thought were okay because they've just been so quiet and have still been productive during this period, but could secretly have been harboring a massive grudge that's just got larger and larger and larger. So the moment somebody comes along and offers an alternate role, another job somewhere else, they're gone. So what we don't want to happen is you suddenly have a mass exodus of staff because they've just been sort of hedging their bets until all of this is over. So there's very practical reasons as well. I know I'm sort of always saying it's the law, but actually, if you do put these things in place and you've got the right records in place, for measuring productivity of your staff, it's an excellent tool that you can just press a button and see where everybody's up to. So there are practical reasons to do this too.
And just finally, Matthew, just going back to the parent element, and I was talking yesterday with someone about potentially having sort of almost PTSD from homeschooling. Have you had any, have there been companies asking for advice about what to do where homeschooling parents are actually asking for furlough? Like, is there any official guidance on that, or?
So this is really tricky. Our most common phone call right now is something to do with someone who's got a child that being homeschooled. We've got past all the risk assessments and things now, and it's all about productivity. There's actually no official furlough guidance on this, believe it or not. For people who are shielding and have been told they've got a shield, there is something in place there. But no, it's going to depend on the company. Now, officially, what the law says is you can't furlough somebody if you've got work for them. So it's how, let's say you were one of my clients and you rang me and said, Matthew, this person's struggling, they want to be furloughed. In principle, we have no problem furloughing them. What we need to do is just make sure that we can put together a mini business plan just to show, this is for HMRC, just to be able to show HMRC that at that time there was no practical work for that person, nothing that they could do essentially whilst looking after their child, but this is the legal interpretation we've taken. So we can put that in. Essentially, that person is furloughed, and if for any reason HMRC say we're not happy, HMRC say send us the documents, you've just got everything in place to cover that. And we get a lot of questions like that. So it depends on what your documents say. But if you're with somebody like myself, you've got the best chance of having documents that say what you need them to say. And I've got to be careful how I say this. We can't be fraudulent with it. If you're an absolutely busy machine and you're recruiting right now, we are going to struggle to put a document together to say that there wasn't enough work for that person. But if you've got all recruitment on hold, then yeah, it's something that we can look at, and it's something that can be done. And it is being requested a lot. People are asking for furlough now way more than they were a year ago. And that's just an education piece. More people know about it now. They know more people that have been furloughed. And if you've got someone who's been at home for the last year playing with their kids on 80% of pay, and someone who's been sat in a home office whilst trying to juggle in a home school, you can appreciate why many employees will at least ask the question, is this something that's available?
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. Conscious of the time, so
yes.
I guess we should probably round up now. There's so much information there to go over. We will share recording for those who would like it and some notes.
Brilliant.
And I'll share also for everyone Matthew's details, so you can contact him directly for that if you'd like further discussion with him. Also, I think most people in our office managers, HR managers LinkedIn group, but if you're not, we can make sure that you're invited in there. And I think it would be really helpful, I certainly would find it helpful if we could share some of the things that we're doing with our teams and employees perhaps there. That would be really great. Like I mean, some of it we might already know, but aerobics class or yoga or Pilates or meditation or cookery classes, or I don't know, whatever it is people are doing. I think that's where I also think it's hard to kind of think of new things that we can do with our employees to have that weekly check-in, just to make it a bit more fun and interesting as we're, progressing through this time still at home.
I think that's a great suggestion, actually. That's really good.
So yeah, I'll double check that everyone's in that group, and I'll invite you in if you're not. But yeah, I think that all sounds great.
Marvelous.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
No, it's my pleasure. And if anybody does want that confidential review, you want to see costings for my service, anything like that, let Susanna know, and she's going to send my details out. Call me directly as opposed to Peninsula, purely because I can give you that confidential review for nothing. And if you do want to look at rates and costings, as a member of ISE, you are entitled to a discount, but only if you come via myself. But that's only for people who want to explore that. You can get my information from Susanna.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matthew.
And thank you everyone for joining.
No, that's my absolute pleasure. I hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you for your time today.
And thanks to everyone for joining. It was really great, and we'll be in touch.